If you like my videos, don't forget to follow me on social media to keep up to date with all the latest news regarding my channel and my content. And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe below or at the end of the video. Don't forget to check out my brand new Amazon store, filled with recommendations on Blu-rays, DVDs, books, and other media featured in my videos. G'day guys, Dave Lee coming at you once again from Down Under with another movie review. Today we're taking a look at the latest release from DreamWorks Pictures and 20th Century Fox and Entertainment One Distribution. Directed by legendary director Steven Spielberg and starring Hollywood royalty Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep alongside an ensemble cast including Bob Odenkirk, Bradley Whitford, Sarah Paulson and Alison Brie. It is The Post. The Post is the true story of the 1971 media leaks of the Pentagon Papers, a 17-volume, 7,000-page collection of the most highly secretive US government documents about the Vietnam War, and including 30 years worth of cover-ups detailing US and Vietnamese relations. Amongst other revelations including documentation of rigged US government elections, the Pentagon Papers most importantly disclosed the US government's knowledge that they really had no chance at winning the Vietnam War, although continued to knowingly send over 58,000 troops to their deaths, and they did this all to avoid their own humiliation. Pentagon Papers were leaked to multiple newspapers, and the New York Times were the very first to publish any information on them, which led to President Richard Nixon opening an injunction case against the New York Times. In The Post, when the papers land into the hands of the Washington Post chief editor Ben Bradley and the paper's publisher Kay Graham, they must decide, along with their team of writers and lawyers, whether to publish the information, perhaps putting them all in contempt of court and risking the future of the newspaper and potential imprisonment for all involved. Personally, I'm a huge history buff, especially when it comes to 20th century American history. It's probably the thing that I have studied the most heavily next to films and filmmaking. The Pentagon Papers are something that I've sort of read about in passing, but not anything that I've really studied all that heavily. So given that this movie sort of focuses around them and has the added bonus of having one of my favorite filmmakers and one of my favorite actors on board, I was incredibly hyped and intrigued to check out this release. The Post is a movie which seems incredibly topical right now, especially in this day and age of media leaks and wars between governments and the media, and a time where strong female characters are finally taking center stage on the screen, rising amongst a series of very important women's liberation movements. But it actually surprised me to learn that when Steven Spielberg first came across this script, he found it so topical that he didn't want to spend the regular 2 to 3 years planning and creating this movie. He wanted to make it straight away and release it within the next year. So he sort of rushed this movie into production with very, very little planning. And this was like immediately after he'd finished shooting Ready Player One. Like they were in very, very early post-production stages of that movie. That movie hasn't even been released yet. That's not even coming out until later in the year. So yes, this was a movie that had an incredibly quick production which lasted less than 10 months. So Steven Spielberg is certainly commendable for his efforts with this, especially in being able to pull together a movie with such powerhouse leads and such a wonderful supporting cast in such a small amount of time. But that said, if Steven Spielberg, who is one of the most beloved filmmakers of all time, couldn't do this, who could? This movie really had great potential from the very beginning. If Steven Spielberg found this so intriguing and so urgent, that kind of speaks volumes. But the end product of this is a movie that's not really all that great. I mean, it's good, but it's not great. I only came across the information regarding this movie's hurried production after I'd seen the movie, actually when I was doing a little bit of research for this review. And I kind of feel like now, in hindsight, some of the issues I had with the movie kind of make a little bit of sense. I kind of feel that perhaps the rush of this production was ultimately to the detriment of the final product. This movie doesn't really feel like your standard Steven Spielberg fare. I know that he has had a tendency to produce true life dramas based on events in American history, but aside from a stellar cast and a supporting score from maestro John Williams, who, might I add, at 85 years of age, still has it, I just never really felt the Spielberg influence on this movie. Given Spielberg has directed something like 35 features and produced over 150 productions since the early 1970s. Spielberg is a director who you would imagine is quick and efficient and has his style down to a T. He is someone who could easily fall into the trap of becoming one of those directors for hire, but I feel like Spielberg is more than just that. I feel like he only produces movies that are really personal stories to him, stories that he wants to personally tell to his audience. So the fact that he rushed this film production really comes as a huge surprise to me. I really honestly feel like this is a story that should have had more time to breathe in the production process. It becomes kind of evident that the little amount of time he spent with this story really did impact his storytelling ability on this one. Don't get me wrong, this is a beautifully directed movie, but it's certainly not one that I am going to recall straight away when I look back to his body of work in the future. Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep both deliver great performances. The two have actually never appeared alongside each other on the screen before, and while this marks Hanks' 5th collaboration with the director, Streep has never appeared in a Spielberg film outside of a small vocal cameo in Artificial Intelligence. Hank is a lifelong favourite of mine, and I consider him to be one of the greatest living actors. His performance here as Ben Bailey isn't really the best of his career, but it's still very good. Bailey was previously portrayed by Jason Robards in the classic 1976 film All the President's Men, and while Hanks does make this his own character, he certainly does bring a few visual nods to Robards' performance into his own, which I kind of thought was a very nice way to tie the two movies together. Overall though, this was a relatively memorable Hanks performance. Streep, on the other hand, is an actress whose work I've never really been incredibly big on. I'm not a huge fan of hers, but her talent really is undeniable. Her performance here is something incredibly special, and watching her act, she just seems so effortless, and I say that in the most complimentary way possible. Streep is certainly the best choice for the role of Graham, particularly as she's been a figurehead for the current women's liberation movements like Me Too and Time's Up. Graham was similarly an incredibly important female figurehead, running one of America's biggest newspapers in a time that was very much seen as a man's world. Given the very limited amount of time that these two actors had to piece together their roles, which by all accounts puts the film's principal productions between 6 to 8 weeks, I think the two did a very reasonable job. And just like directing is to Steven Spielberg, acting is second nature to these two legends of the screen, and for either of them to deliver a performance in this day and age that is less than great really is unprecedented. There are some really great scenes in here where the movie offers us some really great moments that are filmed entirely in one long shot. There's not a huge amount of heavy cutting back and forth between the two actors, but instead great moments of raw, unbridled performance, which really work as a fantastic showcase of just how superb these two actors are with their craft. Whether this was Spielberg's way of avoiding having to shoot an overabundance of footage in such a short production span, or whether this was his way of showcasing real performances as opposed to something that was manufactured in an editing booth, I felt that this was one of the things that just really worked for this movie. The Post is somewhat of a spiritual prequel to the aforementioned All the President's Men, which detailed the Washington Post's investigation of the Watergate scandal, which would occur not long after the Pentagon Papers scandal. And there's actually some really great nods to the classic movie in this one. There's one major one, which I won't spoil for you here, but which is a really nice moment for those familiar with the classic film. I do feel, however, the Post tries and tries hard to be another All the President's Men, and it just simply never reaches the same heights. All the President's Men is a movie that is thrilling and gripping from beginning to end, while The Post, however, kind of feels like a movie that struggles for its first half, if not, the first 3/4 of its length. There are so many moments in this movie where it feels like it's finally gaining traction, it's finally building to something, it's finally about to take off, and then it just comes to a grinding halt. And this happens multiple times throughout the movie's runtime. The sequences with Bailey and his team discovering the papers are really superb and incredibly thrilling, but every time we cut back to Graham's subplot, it feels like the movie just loses a little bit of steam. I just think that some of her sequences were kind of unnecessary to the overall movie's story. They slowed the pace down, and I kind of feel like they pushed the movie's most exciting moments into the sidelines. To be completely honest, the movie's two main characters don't really share a great deal of screen time together, and in the end that just kind of just feels like the movie is juggling between being a movie about Bailey and being a movie about Graham, and doesn't really sort of have one solid focus. I feel like that is to the expense of this movie just having one solid storyline, and while I feel that both characters' stories are just as important to what Steven Spielberg's trying to tell here, I do kind of just wish he had chosen to put heavy focus on one or the other. It really would have just boiled down to a more consistent movie overall. The last act of this movie, though, is absolutely magnificent and electrifying, and it just so happens that this last act is where Hanks and Streep kind of spend the most amount of screen time together. It's the point where the movie finally gains its legs, but it just feels like it's a little bit too late and makes me wish the whole movie had been as stimulating as its last act. The last act works as a fantastic payoff to this story, but I just wish it didn't make the rest of the movie feel like a slogging build-up. That said, I did enjoy the movie overall, and I would definitely give The Post an easy 3 papers out of 5. I didn't dislike this movie, but I didn't love it as much as I'd hoped from another Spielberg-Hanks fare. All in all, it just feels like a movie that tries to be more than what it is or what it could have been. Exciting at the end, but slow for the most part. It's not something that I feel like I'm going to be revisiting anytime soon, but I honestly don't think that that's going to stop this movie from getting a couple of Academy Award nominations. It probably will, but whether it's deserving of any, I don't think so. The Post is in cinemas worldwide right now, and at that, thank you very much to my wonderful new friends over at Entertainment One for providing me with in-season passes to check out this movie for the purposes of this review. If you're a first-time viewer of my channel and you've liked this review and you'd like to see more like it in the future, then please, at the end of the video, hit that big old subscribe button up on your screen. To all my regular viewers out there, thank you once again for joining me for another movie review, and to absolutely everybody out there, don't forget to hit that like button down below. It's down there somewhere. It does a great deal in getting these videos out there. And look guys, I hope I'll see you all again soon. Until next time though guys, take care and I hope you have a wonderful day.